And good morning. We are live here on Overheard Overnight for a Monday, May the 13th, 2024. I'm Chris Morales, and this morning we're talking about the meaning of life. What is it? Is there an overarching meaning of life? And I can't help but think about that every time I think about where we are on this rock that circles this sun by 90 something million miles. Swirling through a galaxy that supposedly is infinite and is unending with billions potentially of planets out there that could sustain life, but we haven't found any yet. And here we are, this speck, been here on this planet at least for what, 4.5 billion years, with humanity, us, the dominant species currently being here about a couple 100,000. I've heard it stretch back to 2 million. But anyway, this iteration of mammalian life, being a couple 100,000 years old potentially, and civilization as we know it not being much more than about 10,000 years. And we have the arrogance to think that there is an overarching meaning of life. I much rather now think about life in terms of what I can do and what kind of impact I can have on those around me. And so, I've kind of in my head over the last little while thought about meaning of life really is all about sacrifice. Share a few stories with you this morning. The first one being sacrifice with regards to physical. There I was about 25 years old. Twins were months old at that point. I'm sitting in my doctor's office. And he's looking at me after a physical and saying these words, "Well, Chris, when would you like me to fill out the prescription for your high blood pressure?" 25 years old, kids just born, lots of life runway ahead. Okay, so a little bit overweight. And he's telling me that I'm going to need medication in order to get through the rest of my life. And I just rejected that outright. Just said, no, not interested. There's a family pattern, history of high blood pressure, hypertension, stroke, the rest of it, right? Wasn't interested in that particular approach. So I said, well, what are my options? And he said, well, they're simple. Change your lifestyle, change your diet, get some exercise. Well, number 3 resonated. And over the course of a couple of years, I managed to take up running, and the rest is history, as they say. Been running for a lot of years now, but it took a while to get there. But physical allowed me to get to where I am today. The sacrifice of getting up at 4:30 or 5 every morning to go out for a run for some greater good down the road, right? So there's the physical side of things taken care of. From a mental perspective, I can never get over being at St. Teresa Preparatory School in Kingston, Jamaica, learning my times tables. Of all the things that you sacrificed as a child in school, wearing uniforms, sitting in rows and listening to teachers drone on all morning. The biggest one for me was learning the multiplication tables. Now, if you've never had this, here's how it works. You memorize 2 times 2, 2 times 3, all the way up to 2 times 12. And you do that for the 2s, the 3s, the 4s, all the way up to 12. Then you do it backwards. And you do this over and over and over. So by rote, you're learning how to count, how to multiply. But in that, the sacrifice of learning that, of doing that, the painfulness of that, you learn how to learn. You learn that sometimes it's important to focus on the simple things and get the basics down before you move on to the next. So some sacrifices there for sure. Now, there's an emotional level of sacrifice. And the emotional one was a tricky one for me because I really hadn't thought about it much until an incident occurred with one of my sons when he was going down a toboggan hill in Clarkson. Unfortunately, that day he fell off the sled, slammed into a tree, and broke both his femurs. Yeah, that's right. The femurs, the big bones above the knees, broken, both of them. And I got the phone call. So did Jackie, the wife at the time. And we both just absolutely petrified, right? We're absolutely out of our minds thinking, what the heck does this really mean? Get to the hospital, and there he is. I don't know if he was much more than maybe 10 or 12. I've lost track at the time. And there he is lying in bed with his legs up in the air, both of them in traction. And he was to stay like that for about 6 weeks before he was put into casts, where he stayed in those for another 4 to 6 weeks. After everyone had gone for the evening, his brothers had left. They were in shock, of course. I was there with him the night, stayed with him the night. And I'm looking down at him, and the emotion is just screaming through me. Can I do anything? What am I prepared to do? I'll do anything to change places with him. And that's one of those moments when you go, I'll make the ultimate sacrifice for my son, for someone else. Which leads to number 4 for me, which is death. And death is something that, we none of us escape, right? Death and taxes. Suspect that death is worse. It is final. Taxes you can dodge. Sally passed away last year, and it was a very traumatic experience. Still dealing with it. But in that moment of dying, she was able to pass on some strength, some wisdom. I've talked about that before. And so for me, death isn't really the ultimate sacrifice yet, because there's so much that comes out of it. And what comes out of it is, in fact, life. And I think now we're talking about, for me anyway, the ultimate sacrifice. And that is to bring life into the world, to take that leap of faith, the biggest leap of faith you're going to take, which is to bring another human being into the world and pretend for a moment that you know what you're doing and that you can actually take care of this other being for the rest of your life, basically. Even when they're grown-ups, guess what? They're still around. They have grandkids. And for me, that life-changing moment happened within a couple of months after Sally passed last year. 2 new grandchildren came into the world. So the sacrifice of having those kids 40 odd years ago, raising them and putting yourself through whatever you have to do to get them, to me is the ultimate sacrifice when you see new life come along. And so for me, I think the meaning of life really is sacrifice. What are you worth? Let me try again. What is worth giving up today so you can have something tomorrow? What is worth sacrificing today for benefit later on? And we as humans have a particularly unique way of dealing with that. We are prepared. We are able to handle the concept of what that really is. That's optimism. And it's been the driver for me for so many years. As long as I have a breath, I'm going to make sure I have an opportunity to do something to help someone else. So that's it for me, folks. Meaning of life, sacrifice. End of the day, it's all about survival. Until next time, just remember, be good.